Three great topics today. Immigration in Canada. Have we gone too far? Healthcare reform. Can we keep the corruption out of it? And most important of all, where the hell are we? This episode of the Lime Podcast is brought to you by Forestry for the Future. Canada's housing crisis demands bold, scalable solutions. Build Canada Homes is an opportunity to leverage Canadian wood in modern construction. Wood-based methods like mass timber and modular construction can significantly reduce build times, waste, and carbon emissions while supporting local economies. Expanding building codes, streamlining approvals, and prioritizing domestic wood in federal projects could double demand and foster job creation in rural and northern communities. Despite trade challenges and market volatility, a partnership between industry and government is vital to stabilize the sector, enhance competitiveness, and deliver innovative, sustainably sourced Canadian wood products for homes across Canada and abroad. With capacity growing across provinces, stable demand and predictable financing are key to unlocking the sector's potential. We need to build Canada Homes with Canadian wood. To learn more, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. Well, I guess we're going to do this in reverse order. Hello, everybody. Jen and I, anyone listening to this, you might notice our audio quality is not quite as good as normal, although we're doing our best. If you're looking at it, you know that Jen and I are both not where we normally are. We're in hotels, for the record, and to avoid any rumors, we're in different hotels in different provinces.
Different cities.
In different cities. I'm in Halifax. I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm going to be here for a couple of days for the International Security Forum, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But Jen, where are you when we find you on this beautiful Friday?
Oh, I'm in Ottawa, and I am blowing the Lion subscriber money with a fancy hotel room at the Fairmont Hotel. I am living it up. Before I went to bed last night, I went to go spend some time in their really pretty 20s bar, just on principle.
Oh,
I
yeah,
just
yeah.
like French onion soup. Also, I must say, I'm having a lovely time here in Ottawa, but my God, the Caesars are terrible. They put like maple syrup in the Caesar, so it's like this sickly sweet drink. I couldn't even drink it. It was just awful. But anyway, look, these are the sorts of adventures that you have when you're away from home.
If I'm not wrong, the Caesar actually originated in Calgary.
It did. I know how to make a good Caesar, all right? Firstly, there's no sugar in it and there's no sweetness. Like, what are we even doing here? And secondly, how you really elevate a Caesar is like an ounce of pickle juice.
Okay. I've never done the pickle juice, but I will.
It makes a big difference.
So what are you doing in Ottawa other than having substandard Caesars?
Well, I mean, other than that, the food and the company has been lovely. No, so you will remember from last week's podcast or maybe 2 weeks ago podcast, that I said that I would be interviewing Ross Douthat, not do that, Douthat. Thank you to the reader who corrected my terrible pronunciation. I'm a writer. No one expects that from me. Anyway, he is a columnist from the New York Times. He's kind of like the resident heretical Catholic in the very liberal institution of the New York Times. So he writes a lot about faith and faith issues. He also tends to cross swords on various cultural issues of note. He really came to a lot of Canadians' attentions last year when he wrote a column basically making the case for Canada joining America in the midst of Trump's
51st state. Yeah.
We'll call it teasing. So that he gained the ire for Canada about that, and he is in Canada right now. He's in Ottawa right now to deliver the Shugart lecture series, which is an inaugural lecture series being put forth by a kind of Christian think tank called Cardis. I've got a good relationship with Cardis. I quite like them. They're pretty chill.
They're great.
They're actually really great.
Yeah.
And I think that also what's very interesting is that there is a definite vibe shift happening in the United States, and I think also in Canada, toward being a bit more open toward religion and religiosity in public life. I think that's taking a bit of a dark turn in America. I think it's probably has a more wholesome version that it can take in Canada. That's another conversation for another day. But Cardis is really great. So they invited me to sit down with Ross ahead of his lecture, and we did a full, they gave me like an hour and 10 minutes. Ross was very generous with his time. I totally gave him shit for the first half of it, but it's super fun. I think if you're into Dao that, if you're into me giving Dao that shit, and if you're into any kind of deeper discourse about the role of religion in public life, the podcast will be for you. It should be out this week for our On the Line segment.
Okay, so because we obviously there's some logistics there. You think you'll be able to turn it around for Tuesday?
Yeah, I should have the raw files sort of by the end of the day, and we should probably be able to turn around by Tuesday, unless something goes dreadfully wrong. Knock, knock. Everything kind of went dreadfully wrong. So, like, I was supposed to interview him early Thursday morning, and his flight couldn't land in Ottawa because of the fog. So they got redirected to Syracuse. And this basically blew a hole in my entire day. But it was fine. It worked out fine. It was all good. I felt bad for like the Cardis people because they had to rearrange everything on the fly. But it's
Imagine getting on a plane to go to Ottawa and you step off a plane in Syracuse.
Syracuse. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, everything's good. It went really well, I think. And I've had an opportunity to spend some time in Ottawa. I mean, I don't really get out here very often, which is a shame because I do cover politics, but of course I'm kind of a Calgary hermit. And so I've taken the opportunity to just sort of meet with people and chat and go for dinners and go for coffees. And I've had some really fascinating and interesting conversations with people who I normally don't get to see face to face. And it's been good. It's been really interesting. I have some insight. Let me just say that.
Well, I was thinking you say Calgary hermit, clutching your Caesars because you have no drinking water because your pipes have broken, but you've got amazing, proper, savory Caesars. So,
yeah, well, it was broken. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute.
We are.
So, no, I think that's great. Cardis is a really interesting think tank. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I'm not particularly religious. Like, you've always been the loud and proud atheist. I'm not that. It's just, I'm a little more...
I don't know if I'm a loud and proud atheist anymore, but I have
a woman in transition.
Well, sort of. Like, I don't know. I don't think conventional religion's probably the right path for me. But I think that the claims of new atheism have lost their luster. Let me just put it that way.
Well, honestly, I mean that's the point I was going towards. So, like, I've never identified as an atheist. I'm not an atheist because I do believe in God. I've always been skeptical of any club, and that includes religion. I'm also, contrary to people who only ever read me or hear me in podcasts, something people probably wouldn't know about me is that I am a massive introvert. And the idea of me ever like leaving my home where I have all my stuff to go hang out in a community I joined for the sake of finding a community, that ain't me. But I do think, being a guy who's read a history book or two, I do think, and I know this is something you and Ross were talking about, there's something wrong with our society. Like, there's a missing ingredient, and I have absolutely no desire to be a member of a church, but I wish the rest of you were. And like, that would sort of be my ideal, a society where there was a positive unifying force. In theory, it could be secularism. I don't think that's worked. I think that's been an experiment that hasn't really worked. But where I just didn't have to show up, where I would reap all the societal benefits of like unity of purpose, but then I would be at home reading a book. And I think the Cardis guys have been doing something that's been incredibly difficult to do in the Canadian context. And they're not new. Like, they've been around for a while. They've been keeping the fire burning. And this was at a time when, oh gosh, I'm not sure it's different now, but certainly it's probably easier right now to be actually like a religiously identified institution in Canada than it would have been 10 years ago. But they've been going the whole time. And they've been willing to have really interesting conversations that were just not happening anywhere else. So they've produced a lot of interesting content over the years, and we've shared some of it at the line. Can I just ask you, in the basic terms, what's the conference about? Like, what are the topics that are being discussed?
Yeah, so basically, the idea is, I think that this was the inaugural lecture series. They're bringing people out to speak about various topics. I can talk about Dowdet's speech because it was very well received and it was very interesting as well. And the idea is it's just they're bringing interesting speakers out to do this big lecture. I think there was like 1,000 people in the room. It was very well attended, which to me was also indicative of a really significant vibe shift on religious matters and spiritual matters. I would say, like, I would note, like, look, I think a lot of people on the progressive left are going to try and portray Cardis as something like a Christian nationalist. They're not, as far as like that's not the vibe I get from them at all. They're very sort of non-denominational. It's I start time I started having connections with Cardis, I was like, you are aware that like I'm a heretical quasi non-believer mystic, right? And they were like, yeah, no, you're the best we can do. We'll take it. Like that, right? These guys aren't the Charlie Kirk show by any stretch. But I do think that they are a Christian think tank, and I think that they do believe very firmly in using sort of Christian values generally writ as a good underscore for, the work that people do in public life. And faith, I think, is one of the most undercovered. I mean, I've spoken about this before. Faith is really one of the most undercovered aspects of Canadian life in Canadian journalism. Most Canadian journalists are kind of light secularists. Mm-hmm. I think most Canadian journalists have a very negative attitude toward religion, if a neutral to negative attitude toward religion. And as a result, we don't cover, like the Post used to have a religion editor, but we don't cover religion at all, despite the fact that it's probably one of the most biggest and most pervasive and most interesting set of institutions in the country. And it also, increasingly, as I get into politics, I'm starting to understand that a lot of politics is downstream of religion. And increasingly, politics is downstream of religion. So that if you don't understand what's happening in certain kinds of denominational sects and the kinds of logic and arguments that are getting made in certain denominational sects, you will have a very, very hard time predicting what's going to happen in the political sphere, and why it's happening in the political sphere, and why things are happening, I think, more importantly. So I find that intersection to be really interesting. And my focus has started to shift a little bit more toward it. So Douthat's speech was a fascinating one, because essentially, I ribbed him a lot about that Canada column, but he made two really interesting points that I think were fundamentally true. One is that Canada, as it stands right now, really lacks a kind of national identity, especially in Anglo-Canada. And the point is, look, if you don't have a national identity, if you're not actually trying to, for lack of a better term, procreate or pass a set of institutional values and institutions on to your children, then pack it in and join us. Like there's nothing left to fight for. He's right about that. The next thing, I think so too. So one of the challenges, I think, and it's going to fall to conservatives in this country, because I think progressives have given up this particular path, but it's going to fall to a lot of conservatives in this country to redefine what it is where we are as a nation and why we are going to continue to exist. What is the purpose of not joining America? We can't just say that we in Canada are not Americans. That's not a cohesive national identity. It's not sustainable, and it falls apart the second America ceases to be led by Trump. So what is it that we are? What makes us different, and what makes our way of life and way of doing things worth perpetuating? If we can't answer those questions for ourselves without resorting to some kind of self-hating narrative, then there's nothing worth fighting for anymore.
Well, Jen, what about dental care?
What about dental care? Indeed. Well, this is the trap that I think conservatives have also fallen into, right? They've reduced the concept of a national identity to a series of transactions, a question of goods for services and taxpayer funds. Yeah, I mean, look, we can sit here and have debates about what the correct nominal tax rate is. That's totally fine. But there has to be a sense that we're all working together to some common purpose. And if we're not working together to a common purpose, then all you're left with is nationhood as a transaction.
A nation state should not be reduced to a customer service kiosk.
Yeah, that's right. So look, I don't have answers to those questions, but I think that that's a question worth asking. The second argument that he fundamentally made, and I thought this was really interesting, is he said, look, we've got a couple of, for lack of a better term, dark forces about to descend on us. One is sort of the destabilizing impacts of social media and ubiquitous internet usage. The frictionlessness of this is actually degrading real human connection. And the other potential impacts of AI that threaten to make a lot of human work and human value obsolete. And his argument is the communities that will survive those impacts, the communities that are more likely to be healthy, integrated, and willing to perpetuate themselves, are communities that are probably bounded by religious faith and religious belief, a common belief in the value of humans as themselves, clear sort of moral structures that underpin family formation and continuation, and communities that actually create community in a very meaningful and real sense, not just the digital facsimile thereof. I think that's probably right. Not to say that religious communities are doing great on any of these files of late. I mean, we don't need to go into scandals in the Mormon Church or the Catholic Church or a lot of Protestants at length to know that not all of these communities are healthy in and of themselves. They certainly aren't. And that requires honest inquiry and challenge. But I think fundamentally that's correct. If you are a single atomized individual, who has no family, no community, nowhere to go, you're already flirting with a kind of existential suicide, right? So this is something that needs to be addressed.
I feel bad now because as soon as you said if you're an atomized individual, like my face lit up, but then you finished the sentence and you meant it as a bad thing. Can I ask you?
You also have a family. You do have a community. You have close friends. You're doing better than most men, and you're certainly doing better than most young men nowadays. I mean, there's a reason why we're seeing the rise of griperism, right? Which is just a philosophy of total nihilism, and self-defeat. So there has to be an antidote to that. And I think that there's probably not one antidote. I don't think the antidote to that is one religious sect or anything else. I like living in a pluralistic society where people have a lot of different choices, right? But you have to make a choice, and you have to find something that works for you.
I want to tell you why I'm in Halifax, and I want to tell you some of what's going on here, but you have me just at a little bit of a disadvantage because you're in the middle of your event in Ottawa, whereas mine hasn't started yet. I flew in last night, and the event, so we're recording this in the morning, and then my event starts later in the afternoon. So I can't really tell you much about it yet, but I do want to ask you a question about your event, though, or not even about the event. I want to ask you a question in response to something you said. You said something a minute ago, and I swear to God, I'm not asking this in a culture war, provocative, controversial way. I just want to honestly get your opinion on this. You had said a minute ago that to the extent that religion is covered in the Canadian press, it is normally covered negatively. And I think that's probably true. But I do want to ask you a question, and this is going to sound more culture warrior than I normally sound.
If it's covered at all, I think that actually what mostly religion receives is benign neglect.
Well, to the extent it's covered at all, and if it is covered negatively, do you mean religion in general, or do you mean Christianity?
Oh, yeah, no, I think I think that people are more willing to criticize the stuff they're more familiar with, right? It's much easier for me to be shitty to the Catholic Church because I have experience with the Catholic Church. Yeah. So I'm just exposed to it. And I think that that's probably true of a lot of the people who are in the journalist class, right? They're probably much more willing to be harsh with Christianity because they have personal experiences with Christianity that have been negative, right? Or personal experiences with churches that have been negative. So look, I don't necessarily, and it's harder to say, me, Jen Gerson, I'm going to be brutally critical of the mosque in the northeast of Calgary. Firstly, because I don't go to that mosque. I don't go there. Yeah. That's not my space. So I don't really know what's going on there. And secondly, I do think there's a reflexive sort of unwillingness to be highly critical of people who aren't white, right? Like that's more what I was going to. Yeah, no, of course. I think that's part of it. Or I think that maybe there's a little bit more of a reflexive. There's a desire not to be racist, which I think is a good desire. You shouldn't want to be racist. That's appropriate. And there's a respect that, like, look, it's hard for someone from the outside to judge the good or the evil of any particular religious faith from the outside, right? So yeah, but I think I also think that that's shifting a little bit. And I think that, as you have more journalists who are coming from within those faith communities, I think you'll get more critical reporting coming from within those faith communities, right? But first you have to sort of accept that faith is something worth covering, right? And I think that it is.
My gut feeling on that front, and to your point, and this is a blind spot for me because I'm not particularly religious, and I was never on the religion beat to the extent it even exists in Canada. But you just said something a minute ago I think is completely accurate, that the Canadian demographics are changing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we are now going to be getting great reporters and journalists and commentators who are coming out of the Muslim community, the Hindu community, basically every faith group that is now represented in Canada, particularly in the big cities where the big news organizations are. They will have reporters who are from that community. And I think there will be a willingness to go out and say, you'll have a young reporter who is nominally of a faith community and of a diaspora, but who won't care because they're Canadian and they've been raised in a multicultural secular society. And if they see shenanigans, they're going to call shenanigans on it. What I wonder then is if you've got, I don't mean to pick on Muslims here, I'll just use them as an example. You've got a young Muslim reporter who's grown up in Canada, who hears about something bad or corrupt or whatever happening at a local mosque, to your point. They pitch the story, they write it up. Jen, it's going to come to editors that look and grew up the way you and I did. And I think there's going to be a squeamishness about a big legacy Canadian institution going and picking a fight with a mosque or a temple or anything. I
don't know that's true. I think that actually if there is shenanigans happening in other types of religious groups, and there's, we all know that getting those types of stories to what's called a reportable standard is really hard. You need people on the record. You need people. It needs to pass legal muster. Like it's a hard thing to
Lawyers.
do. But I think that, to be honest with you, the challenge on that is less sort of white editor squeamishness, and probably the challenge is more just the lack of resources. The other thing that I think is probably going to be a bit of a challenge here, like that's the bigger issue. The other thing that I think that is a challenge too is that sometimes reporters who are deeply embedded in a particular community of any kind are very reluctant to be critical of that community because they don't want to be ostracized from that community. I think that is a pan-human experience, regardless of race or background.
100%.
But like, if I were like deeply embedded in the Catholic Church, it would be really, really hard for me to cover the priest sex scandal, in the Catholic Church. Like it would be a hard thing to do. Like I'd get comments, I'd get defensiveness, I'd get all these kinds of things.
Oh, your parents would call you and say we were at the service and no one would sit next to us. Yeah.
And like, if you read people, I've talked a lot about Tim Alberta's book, but Tim Alberta's book, his reporting of what's happening in some of the evangelical Christian communities, he's suffered that problem, right? Like he's been ostracized from his church because of his reporting and his critical reporting. So, look, it's a problem for all of us. I do think one of the benefits of living in a pluralistic society is that it's much easier to say, let's say there's a local drama happening at a Lutheran church, right? It's easier for someone to report that to somebody who is kind of in a newsroom and say, look, there's something happening at my church. I need you to investigate it because I can't, right? Like that becomes a bit more of a normal exchange of potential scoops and tips. And I think that we'll see some more of that. That being said, I mean, some of the, you said, are we disproportionately harder on Christians? Maybe, but there's also more Christians in Canada. So that's mathematically appropriate. Secondly, I mean, a lot of the criticism that Christians of all denominations have received in North America in recent years has been deserved, right? There has been shenanigans going on in Catholic churches and Protestant churches and all kinds of denominations. Like there has been a lot of shenanigans. There has been a lot of drama.
No, and I didn't mean to imply otherwise. Like I don't think the criticism has been unfair. I just think there's less squeamishness. It's like,
maybe not. Maybe not. But you know what? Even if there is less squeamishness and there is more of a willingness to be critical by the mainstream media, the churches themselves should be welcoming and thanking that. Right? Like, I know it's hard.
Go read the Alberta book.
Well, I mean, like, look, I know it's hard to be in a situation where you're on the defense. It's not comfortable, but you should welcome increased scrutiny. You should welcome that if you're secure in your faith and you're secure in the value of your church, right? So, and I think a lot of Christians, to be fair, do get that.
Yeah, the Christians do. The churches don't. And,
well, of course, because they're human institutions.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you and I have talked about this before. Any institution loses the sight of the values of its members in favor of its institutional values, and the institutional values are almost always to cover ass and bury scandals and avoid criticism and shut down internal dissent. And it doesn't matter what the institution nominally serves to exist. You put enough humans on a board of directors and they're going to act basically the same way.
Yeah, and I think that's true of religious groups, but it's true of political groups. It's true of corporations. It's true of literally everything. I think that if there's one thing that a church group can do or a religious organization can do, is that it can hold itself to a higher account than that. Right? It can actually hold it because of the values of the faith that the institution proclaims to uphold. It can be welcomed, that kind of criticism and dissent, in a way that it's harder for other human institutions to do. And I think that they should.
I promise the line is not actually acting as an unofficial front for this guy's book agent, but the Tim Alberta book, I think, should be, if you are at all interested in societal or political issues, you should grab a copy of, what was it called? The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, Tim Alberta, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. Pick up a copy. It's an easy read. Like, if I tell you go read a book on modern religion, you're probably going to think it's going to be an 1,100-page slog, but it's actually like a really readable, well-written 400 pages. And I recommend it. You want to hear about Halifax, or anything you want to tie a bow on for Cardis?
I definitely want to hear about Halifax.
So here's the thing, and just to reiterate something I said a minute ago, Jen, the agenda hasn't started yet, so I can't give you any report on the ground of this particular conference. I flew in last night. My air travel plans did not go exactly as intended, so if I seem exhausted today, I am. The plan was to get here early last night, have dinner, spend the night in the hotel, and get up and get a great day of working. No, that didn't go as planned. But the Halifax Security Forum is an annual event. It is put on actually by a Washington, D.C. based think tank, the Halifax International Security Forum. Or pardon me, what is it? The Halifax? I should know this. Whatever. It's the think tank in D.C. And then the Canadian government jointly hosts the annual event here in Halifax, the Halifax International Security Forum, which normally, and I'm saying that for a reason, normally has drawn military leadership, but also defense-related people, whether it's politicians or NGOs or industrialists or think tanks, commentators, journalists. That's why I'm here, from all across the Western Alliance, and even a little more broadly than that. Like if you are a democracy facing any kind of security threat, we're probably going to find some of your delegates at this conference. The thing is, and I've been coming to this thing for years, and it's great. We have a chance to talk about some of the emerging issues, threats, challenges, opportunities from a military security and defense perspective. The Americans have pulled out. So as part of the new alignment in U.S. foreign policy, the White House has pulled the plug on U.S. military participation, or I guess technically the Department of War has pulled the plug on these things. And Halifax isn't the only conference like this. There's a big Munich one too. Do you remember? I don't remember when it was. It was a while ago now, but Vice President Vance showed up at the Munich conference and basically told the Europeans to go pound sand.
Yeah, like you're terrible. You're losing the beat on Western values and freedom of speech. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You call that one the giant projection speach? Like
I don't know.
The darkness of his soul projected upon all of Europe? Yes, that one.
So without wading into whether or not I agree with this, I don't. I think what the Americans have concluded is that these conferences are confabs for Euro weenies and Canuck cowards and others, and that real rock-ribbed, muscular American warriors don't show up to talk about shared values. That's not what they do. Instead, they just blow up fishing boats in the Caribbean. That's what America does. So I'm honestly curious, and like I certainly I'm not going to speak ill of my hosts, and I haven't begun the conference yet. But I'm going to say this very neutrally. I am genuinely curious to see what the conference is like this year, because the American military presence in all previous years has been significant, and Hegseth has ordered that to stop. Now, I do know there's going to be a large congressional delegation here from the United States. I believe, in fact, a larger one than normal. So certainly, I think, and Jen, you follow U.S. politics, so you know this. The normies and sane ones that are left are kind of in the Congress, and there's not that many of them. So I think there are still some U.S. legislators who are trying to keep the transatlantic alliance alive, and they're probably all going to show up in Halifax this weekend. It'll be interesting to talk with them about it. The other thing that's happening, and I'm not going to get into this at any length because I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but you've probably seen this, Jen, if you had the time. There's a draft of a peace plan floating around for the Ukraine war that is essentially a complete capitulation to Russia, and it's pretty pathetic. Like this is peace in our time, 1936 levels bullshit coming out of this proposed peace deal. So I'm just going to go on a limb, Jen.
I think it would require the Ukrainians to reduce their army to 30% of their standing and handing over territories
yeah.
So basically putting themselves on a platter for an inevitable future invasion is what this peace.
And there are nominally security guarantees built in, but they're wafer thin, and no one trusts the U.S., right? So that's kind of the issue. The Europeans, as of this morning, have been rejecting it, but the Ukrainians are in a tough spot, right? Like it's easy for the Europeans to reject the deal. The United States is still bankrolling and providing the armaments for a lot of Ukraine's war effort here, and I don't know if Ukraine can functionally survive without them. So the Ukrainians are in a tough spot. There is going to be a large Ukrainian delegation at this conference starting in a few hours. I look forward to hearing what they have to say. Unfortunately, just with the timing of it, that's about all I've got. What I will also add, this is an event in Canada, that Canada wanted so that it could, be on the radar, no pun intended, for our allies. We can't send you ships, planes, or ground units, but we can throw a big party. So this is part of Canada's soft power. I'm very curious to see what that looks like in the Carney era. This is my first chance to do that, and we'll see what they've got.
Awesome. All right. Well, on that note, I think we should say like and subscribe. We do want to talk about immigration and healthcare. We're really making this a classic Canadian podcast. We'll come back. So, Matt, I know we want to talk about immigration, but firstly, considering you're at the Halifax Security Forum anyway, and considering all of the rumors that seem to be swirling around military procurement of late, I wanted to ask you a quick question. It sounds like we're about to get an announcement on the Gripen.
So the Gripen is a Swedish fighter jet. It is a modern plane, a very capable plane. It is less technologically advanced than the F-35. And that is just me kind of setting up a little bit of the background here. So let me try to explain something, Jen, and I'm going to put this in terms that you don't have to be a total nerd to understand.
Yes, because I'm not.
Yeah, look.
And my feelings about the possibility of running a mixed fleet are not well established.
Okay, so fighter jets are tools, right? And
first we right now a little bit about the F-35 situation.
Oh no, yeah,
and then
don't worry.
What makes the Gripen politically significant?
Fighter jets are tools, and tools are designed to do specific jobs, and some tools are capable of doing more jobs than others, and some do fewer. And the F-35 jet is something Canada's been looking at for a while because it's a tool that can do a whole lot of jobs, but you pay a premium for that. Like you spend a lot of money to get a plane that can do almost everything. And the reality of it is, most of the time, Canada isn't going to need a lot of the capabilities that we are paying or would be paying big money to get in the F-35, but we might need them sometimes. So that puts us in an interesting position. Do you pay for a jet that costs a ton of money and get capabilities you're only going to need 5% of the time? Or do you buy a jet that costs less and is cheaper to operate, but doesn't have those capabilities you might need 5% of the time? This is kind of the dilemma Canada's been in. And there's a really easy answer to this, which is that you buy both. And you buy them in quantities that sort of go, the F-35, we will operate in smaller numbers for the times when we actually do need those very top-end sophisticated capabilities. And you get another jet like the Gripen, which is 100% capable of handling 95% of the missions. And the reason we haven't wanted to do that in Canada is because we have a small Air Force, and the fact of life of the Canadian military is there's never enough money. There's never enough facilities. There's never enough ground crew. There's never enough spare parts. So you kind of want to be efficient. And having two simultaneously operating jet fleets is hard, because you need to train pilots on two different jets. You need to have spare parts for two different jets. You need to have ground crew for two different jets. It just adds a lot of complexity and expense. And that has been the argument against the Gripen. Specifically, like the Canadian Air Force clearly wants the F-35, and Canada has been a participant in the F-35 program. So all the push is for us to go that way. But Jen, as you well know, the argument against the F-35 is that the Americans have gone bonkers.
Who's that? Yeah.
Yeah. And, so there's a very...
I would also say, beyond the practical considerations of, well, what happens if American-Canadian relations really sour in a very serious way,
it's the political,
which isn't a high probability outcome, there's something to be said for just basically saying, fuck you, America, we'll eat the cost.
There's not only that, but I mean, yes, I do think there is intangible value in that. But if you're Mark Carney, do you want to write a massive check and hand it to an American defense contractor right now? There's just political reality. Yeah. So splitting the fleet and adding the Gripen alongside the F-35 to me is an idea that makes a lot of sense. A lot of people are very fiercely against this. There's a lot of Canadians in the defense space, including friends of mine, people whom I respect, who say, no, it's a terrible idea. It's going to be a boondoggle. It's going to create huge logistical problems, and the Canadian military is not big enough and doesn't have enough budget to handle that. To which my response is, hire more people and spend more money. I am a proponent of a mixed fleet. I'm not out to lunch about the downsides of it. Like, I get it, but it seems to me like this is a situation where all of the downsides of a mixed fleet fundamentally come down to cost and complexity. And there are solutions to that. We spend more money. And you might have noticed, Jen, the Canadian government's really good at spending money. That's actually something we have a pretty core competency in. So we're talking about like really jacking up defense spending. This can be part of that.
So here's the other objection I've heard to the mixed fleet idea. And I'm not sure that I find it a very compelling objection, but I'm also not, an expert on this sort of issue. And that is all of our allies are flying the F-35. My response to that is, so it's not like it's not like we trade planes with allies. I'm not sure what the problem with that is.
Well, you know what? Let me answer that in a very factual way. First of all, it's not true. Not all of our allies are flying the F-35. Many of our allies are flying the F-35, but it's not all of them. Even the United States is not flying only the F-35. The Americans continue to operate a huge fleet of jets that are more technologically like the Gripen than the F-35. Many European countries operate kind of legacy U.S. jets like F-16s. There's also Euro Typhoon fighters. The French have their own fighter fleet. Like it's simply not true that we need to have the F-35. But I think the value of a mixed fleet is that if we are in a situation where there is a coalition effort underway, and for whatever reason it is desirable to have a fleet of jets that are very similar or identical to each other and are all capable of cooperating. That's what the mixed fleet is for. We can send a couple of squadrons of those and still have a larger, cheaper force ready to defend Canada or handle kind of more lower threshold missions here. The one thing I'm going to add is that Canada plans to buy 88 jets. We should buy way more than that. 88 jets is a number that we came up with a few years ago. And this, I don't want to bore you with too much detail, but 88 jets gives us the ability to basically field 5 squadrons. And for our purposes, I'm going to get nerds trying to fight with me about the administrative versus operational squadrons thing. I know nerds. Let me just make the point here. I'm trying to keep this simple.
No idea what you're talking about.
Yeah,
but
no, I know. I'm just putting that in there to preemptively tell us certain, like I could name 3 or 4 people who are going to break my balls over this, and I'm telling them to go away. I'm keeping this at a level that's accessible. A squadron.
Trying to explain it to me, okay, nerds?
Here's the thing.
Give us some slack.
A squadron is nominally built around 12 jets, and we want 5 of them, which is 60. But the problem is you can't just have, if you want 60 jets, you can't just have 60 because some of them are going to be down for maintenance at any given time. Some of them are going to be used for training. Some of them are going to need to be sent on show the flag missions. So if you actually kind of the rule of thumb is, whatever your actual number of desired jets is, you need to add at least 30%. So let me literally tell you how we came up with 88. We want 60. We add 30%. That's 18, which brings us to 78. And then we added 10 spares. So I'm going to suggest something that is going to blow the minds of Canadian budgeters. The reason we want 60 is because we want 5 squadrons. The reason we want 5 squadrons is because we want 4 to defend our airspace and 1 available to deploy abroad in support of missions. I'm going to just say here that the kind of math that came up with that thinking 10, 20 years ago should maybe be reconsidered. I don't think 5 squadrons is enough. I think we need more squadrons to be able to show the Americans we've got our shit together on our own airspace. And if Canada's future security hinges on showing how good an ally we can be, that we are a net contributor to Western security, showing up with a dozen planes probably doesn't do it. We should be looking at doubling the size of the Air Force. And everyone's going to sigh heavily when they start finding out how much that's going to cost. But do we mean what we say or not? And if we do, why have we convinced ourselves that the defense plans that made sense to Justin Trudeau should still make sense today?
The good rant, good ramble. Well,
was that accessible? Like, I'm not just asking you, like, do you think anyone's going to understand what the hell I just said?
I'm cool. Look, the major risk that Canada specifically runs is, one, we have to contribute to the Western defense if we wind up in some kind of war with Russia or China or whatever else. If that's where this is going, we 1 squadron's not going to be enough. That's not pulling our weight proportional to our size, economy, or whatever else. And secondly, the other major threat that I can see is we need to be able to defend the Arctic. I have a lot of really nice people in my Twitter feeds who are very sure that the Russians would never. I'm not even just concerned about the Russians. I'm increasingly concerned about the Americans. So, we need to be able to hypothetically defend that space and maintain it under Canadian control, or it won't be under our control. It's too valuable space otherwise. So, look, I don't know. I don't know enough about warfare to know whether or not these are enough planes, but it seems to me like this is an obvious place for us to be parking some cash. I don't know.
I do know enough about warfare, Jen, to tell you that it's not enough planes. The 88 number is what we came up with during the very last gasp of that really nice post-Cold War era. And it's also a number where we've gotten it ass backwards. And this is something that happens a lot in Canadian defense planning. We decided how much money we were prepared to spend and then came up with the justification of why that is the right amount of money to spend, instead of looking at the kind of force we need to do the missions we want and figuring out how much it's going to cost. So we need to reverse how we do this. I'm not going to lie to you, Jen. If we do what I'm proposing we do here, people are going to be, even people who are nominally open to defense spending are going to be pretty shocked. Air forces are very expensive. The kind of money we'd be talking about here is huge, but hey, elbows up or something, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we probably won't. So moving on. Look,
no, of course
let's
not.
talk moving on. Talking about immigration. So, look, the Conservatives tabled a bunch of amendments to the liberal, what was it called, the border security bill, C-12, this week. And firstly, a couple of things I wanted to talk about. One is, I told you so. Immigration is going to increasingly define Canadian political discourse. I think that I wrote that column more than a year ago now, and I'm just doing a bit of a victory lap because that's right. And I was able to foresee that that was where this was going to go, not as a result of any belief in the Conservatives, having some kind of racist inclinations, but rather simply because the math on our immigration wasn't mathing. The pressures that it was putting on the systemic housing and social networks we were creating was just simply too high. And also very clearly the Liberals simply lost the plot.
They lost
control over the immigration system, particularly where temporary foreign workers were concerned. Since then, Tony Keller from the Globe and Mail has done a really excellent book about this topic, how the Liberals lost control, and he's done a tour about this.
You did it on the line with him.
I did it on the line with him.
Yeah.
It was fantastic, really, really informative and interesting. It was a good interview. It's pretty clear to me that even the Liberals have acknowledged this. Liberals are announcing that they're going to actually regain control over their system and probably go back to more traditional caps on immigration coming into Canada. The third rail, or how should I say that? I don't know if it's a third rail or if it's just no one knows what the appetite for this particular part of the conversation is. And that is, we can have the mathing conversation. That's a pretty cold technical question about how many people we should be bringing in order to maximize our economic productivity while not straining our underlying resources.
How many jobs do we want filled? How many houses are we going to have? Yeah, math.
That is a Vulcan-esque level of conversation. The other part of the conversation that everyone is afraid to talk about is what are the cultural implications and ramifications of bringing in the level of immigrations that we have. Because that is a very, very hard conversation to have without having deeper conversation about what the underlying culture actually even is. And two, it's a really hard conversation to have without devolving out into racist nativism, right? That's not a conversation. My sense is that just being in Ottawa, that's not the racist nativist conversation is not one that the Conservatives want to have or touch or be associated with, at least the mainstream ones. I do think there is an opening to have a conversation about sort of the cultural implications and ramifications of out of control immigration and how we're going to manage that and what we do now. But there's no clear sense about how to have or frame that conversation in a way that doesn't spiral out into something quite nasty and awful. So that's, I think, the state of play on this stuff. The stuff that Michelle Rumpel-Garner's proposed all strike me as stuff that will have widespread support among Canadians. We're talking about restricting certain forms of extended healthcare coverage to people after their refugee and asylum claims have failed. We're talking about making reforms to the criminal justice system. So I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to try and explain this in as layman a way as possible. But previously, under our amazingly functional criminal justice system, if someone was not a permanent resident or had a tenuous immigration situation and they committed a crime, one of the arguments that might be used to lessen the crime or lessen the punishment would be to say, well, if you throw the book at this temporary foreign worker for drunk driving, they're going to get deported because this is going to be considered a serious criminal offense, and it will screw up their refugee claim or their immigration claim. And then the courts would take that into consideration and be more likely to be more lenient on non-citizens for crimes and serious criminal offenses because of that argument. So this is something that I think the conservatives are rightly pushing back on. Like, that's insane. It's like obviously nuts. And I think that the general consensus is that, if you are not a permanent resident and you are committing serious criminal offenses, fuck off. Like, I don't think that there's a lot of support for that in Canada for
Jen, you were out of town when this happened, but I did an on the line focused explicitly on that. And like you and I are grown-ups. We understand that judges take lots of things into effect when coming up with a sentence.
Absolutely.
What's your economic status? Do you have a troubled upbringing? Like all these things. But just no, I'm with you. Like I think the public, and my conversation was a friendly debate with a lawyer who took some of the opposite views here. But my position to him was, you cannot take two people with identical crimes and go, you're getting 1 day less than Joe Canadian here so that we don't screw up your immigration. Like I can't justify keeping Joe Canadian in jail a single day longer than a non-permanent resident so that the non-permanent resident gets to stay in Canada. I think not only is that insane, I think that's going to destroy our immigration consensus. And this is something we talked about in my On the Line, because the lawyer is making a very smart legal argument for it, Peter Sankoff. And I said to him, I understand that, but this is an issue that is broader than what is the optimal legal scenario here. This stuff has second order effects on things like our immigration consensus itself.
Yeah. And I think that's the correct answer. So I don't know. It's one of these classic cases of the map is not the territory, and if your policy can't be communicated effectively, there's probably a problem with your policy, not your communication approach. So anyway, look, I think that a lot of the amendments that she's proposed here are going to be broadly popular. What I think is probably worth noting here in a more of a macro sense is that we're following other Western democracies into what I would call immigration discourse.
Ooh, yeah.
The immigration consensus has broken. The Liberals gone done broke it. They broke it bad and hard. The Liberals themselves will acknowledge that and have more or less acknowledged that without really atoning for it, which I think is interesting.
Well, that's the thing. They've acknowledged it is broken, but like, boy, when they find the guy who did it.
Yeah. So the question now is the how far are the various factions in Canadian society willing to open up that conversation to more than just a Vulcan-esque math conversation and turn it into a cultural conversation? And can that conversation be had without devolving into, scapegoating and racist shit fights?
About a month or two ago, I don't remember exactly when, I had Greg Jack on from Ipsos, and we talked about this in particular, and he brought some really alarming numbers. So let me throw just a couple of numbers at you here, Jen. And one of the things the guys at Ipsos are doing, and different polling companies do this different ways, but it's broadly similar across all of them. There's basically two things you can poll when you're looking at this. One of them is, are we letting in too many immigrants? So you make like a really blunt question, like, what do you think of the number we're letting in? Too many, too few, just right. And what you find is that there has always been more skepticism than you would imagine in Canada towards large-scale immigration. A lot of Canadians, almost half, are saying, we're letting in too many. And that's actually pretty stable. The other question, though, is, how do you feel about immigrants in your community? And in general, we're actually much more positive on them. And like kind of the cheap and easy way to explain this is, we might be letting in too many people, but I like the ones who are here. And that's actually a pretty sustainable place to be, right? Like in terms of avoiding some of the really negative social consequences, that's workable. I can live with that. The problem is the numbers for both are tanking. So we are seeing, first of all, overall, and this is to Jen's point a minute ago, the Liberals did destroy the immigration consensus by losing control of it. And it's not like, I don't think we need to speak vaguely, Jen, about something that might happen. It's happened.
Yeah,
the immigration consensus is done. The problem is now we are starting to turn against immigrants, and that's a different problem. And to your point about the cultural part and kind of like the heart versus the Vulcan brain, one of the things that comes up, and I know the Conservatives are doing their best. I think Michelle Rempel Garner's proposals are reasonable, and I think the Conservatives have been very careful in this. I'm going to give credit to both there. But one of the things, Jen, and it's kind of the ugly question at the heart of this, if we did screw up and let in too many people, should we send them back?
Well, to some extent, we can't. Like, we don't have the
I know
infrastructure to do it,
I know,
right?
but
Like,
that's the
like
thing, right?
just,
Like having let them in, are we stuck?
So, I mean, this, yeah. Like, look, there's no, like, you can't. There's no uncracking the egg here. Like this is where we're at. So this is an interesting question. One of the reasons why I think that a strong immigration consensus paradoxically requires a pretty strong sense of national identity and culture.
Yeah.
And the reason why that is that we need to be secure in ourselves as Canadians. And using the word Canadians in the most broad sense, I'm not talking about an ethnographic group. I'm talking about everyone who lives here, regardless of their religion, their age, their demographic, their ethnicity, whatever, needs to have a strong enough sense of connection to the idea of Canadianness that the idea of bringing more people to join in to that Canadianness doesn't feel like a threat to an underlying culture or consensus.
We have to know what we're turning them into.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that there has been, particularly on the progressive side, an unwillingness or a kind of underminingness of the idea of a Canadianness. I mean, the person who articulated that most well, I think, is probably Trudeau himself, who wants to sort of turn this into some kind of post-national transactional country club. Hotel for anybody who wants to support the idea of a national dental program. You know what I mean? And that decay, in a sense of there being an underlying culture that people are joining, is paradoxically poisonous to an immigration consensus.
Yep.
Because, like, what are they like? If you have a strong sense of your Canadianness, whatever the hell that means, and I'm working on trying to figure out what it means myself, but if you have a strong sense of your Canadianness and your community's Canadianness, then there's no problem with having people from all over the world coming and joining your community and joining in your Canadianness. You're all furthering the project of the Canadianness. This is good. Everything's fine. But if there is no Canadianness and your sense of yourself and your national identity is just a poisoned relic of patriarchy and, white privilege, the end result of that isn't that you become more welcoming of immigration. Instead, you start to see immigration as a threat to your way of life, your culture, your family, your blah, 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 blah. I think that the Progs have it exactly wrong here. I think you need a strong sense that you have a national identity that is engaged in a project for the common good. And that becomes the underlying narrative or moral foundation for strong and continued immigration. But if you don't have that, we get this. And the end result isn't a positive concept of Canadianness. Instead, what we get is its converse. It's dark shadow. It's kind of racist nativist backlash.
Like I told you in the first segment, like a nation state has to be more than a customer service kiosk. It can't be a bunch of teller windows with a lot of people lining up and you get there and you ask the government for a thing and they give it to you. But that is what we have reduced Canada to. Like our policies, and I think particularly our government for the last decade or so, turned Canada into an economic offering. It's like, come here, safe place, good banking system, resources, effective courts, invest your money here, make money, and your kids can go to school. And it's not that that's bad. Those are all good things here. But the problem is I'm gonna agree with everything you just said, but I'm gonna add something, because I think an effective immigration system and a sustainable immigration consensus requires two things. It requires everything that Jen just said. I think she's bang on, but it also requires a sense that the system is working correctly, the people coming in.
Yes.
So we have to have a system that works to bring people in, and then an identity that they can adopt once they're here. We fucked up on both of those really bad. And we're seeing the consequences of it. I mentioned to you a few minutes ago conversations about all the people we've let in recent years. Should we send them back? I agree with you, Jen. It's going to be impractical. I'm going to make a prediction, though. We're going to hear more and more talking about that, and it's going to start at the fringes, but it won't stay there.
Yeah, I hope not. I hope not, because as I said, I think that really does devolve into racist nativism really quickly, right? Like
Oh
that.
yeah.
Well, not only that, but like bluntly, we can't unscramble the egg here. Like
Or I think someone's gonna come along and vote for me, and I'll unscramble that egg.
and also I do think that there is a way to form a strong and cohesive national identity that is still highly pluralistic, that is still highly welcoming to people of different races and cultures and religions, and still also retains a sense of Canadianness and Canadian values. And like I said, the idea of this nation as being a project for a greater good, in the service of a greater good. I think there's a way to do that. But my God, we better, like, maybe me. I don't know. I guess it's me. I guess somebody needs to start articulating that, and fast, or we're going to run into the very dark converse of that conversation very quickly.
Are you hinting, Jen, that maybe positioning Canada as a genocidal colonial settler state, but hey, we've got okay infrastructure, wasn't the best idea?
I think that it is important for all nations to be honest with themselves about their history. And not all of Canada's history has been positive or well-intentioned or anything else. So I think that we've gone through a reconciliation process that has forced a lot of Canadians to be much more open-eyed about the reality of how this country was created and formed, and the damage that we did to First Nations people in the pursuit of this project. That's I think that is a good thing. Where I think the progs have lost the plot on this sort of stuff is treating that as the entirety of our history. That's not the entirety of our history. Human history is complicated, and it's filled with both good and evil motives, and a fulsome accounting of Canadian history is a positive thing. But if your only accounting of Canadian history is that we're a genocidal white settler state, that's whose only purpose is to engage in an oppressive construct. Firstly, that is ahistoric. That is not the entirety of Canadian history. That is not a historically accurate picture in and of itself. That is a highly distorted picture. And secondly, you can't build a national identity around that, right? Then we might as well, going back to the first segment, then we might as well just pack it in and join the Americans and let history take its course, because there's nothing to fight for. There's nothing to replicate. There's no sustainability to that narrative, right? So whatever. Why are we here? There's better like economic opportunities and weather down south. Like, what if there's nothing worth preserving here? If this entire project is a corrupt one, then pack it in.
Yeah.
Give up.
Yep. No, I know. You and I have been talking about this for almost a year. Like, we're either going to decide to fight and be something, or we should negotiate the best surrender terms we can while we can.
Anyway, that's definitely a segment that's not going to get us into any trouble at all.
I'm sure we've made everybody very happy there. But you know what? Yeah. Let me just put one little beat on it, and then we can wrap it. Canada's official ruling class, well, unofficial ruling class, I guess, in recent generations, has really bought into that postmodern idea that all values are equal, everything's the same, my values aren't any better than yours. If you honestly don't believe you have anything to offer, what the hell do you exist for? Like, you have to believe in yourself. And I know this makes me sound like a hockey coach here, but if you don't believe in yourself, why would anyone else?
But why does Canada exist? What are we here for?
Dental care.
Okay, cool. Apple applies to the United States right now. Like, what are we here?
I know we still have friends in the States. Yeah, this might be the time to send Jen and I our green cards.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, I mean,
send us a DM. I'll give you the address.
We need to be able to answer that question. And like I said before, I don't. The progs have lost the ability to answer that question for us. It's going to fall to the Conservatives, because that's just where this is going. Yeah, and I don't have the. What is Canada good? What are we here for? Why do we exist? What's the point? What is the point of that border, that arbitrary little line? right?
Paul
What is it?
Henderson's goal. Canadarm. Loons.
Forest Accord. I mean,
God damn it, Jen. Vimy Ridge. Mic drop. Ah, boy. Yeah, it's not the
yeah,
best.
not
Not the
great.
best.
We're not doing good. We're not doing good.
Could be doing
Anyway,
better. You know what? Actually, let's come back in a minute, though, and talk about something that actually did give me a flash of hope this week, and it comes
okay.
out of your neck of the woods,
All
even though
right.
you're not there right now. So stick around, www.readtheline.ca. We'll be back in a moment. I'm going to try to leave you on a note of optimism, but I assure you, my note of optimism will still piss about half of you off. So it's funny, like, Jen, right now you've got our Toronto correspondent in Halifax and our Calgary correspondent in Ottawa. So from Nova Scotia, the Ontarian will now explain to the Albertan in Ontario what just happened in Alberta.
Perfect. I'm
I
going
don't
to
know
try
if
and avoid getting the Ottawa hives. You know, they don't like us out here. They don't gun like us out here.
you know what? You'll find your people. Ottawa is chock full of Albertans. They're just in hiding. Healthcare, private healthcare. Danielle Smith has said that her government will be introducing a bill. The bill right now, and this is important, like this is something like during the break, I actually went and I read this to make sure I knew what the hell I was talking about. What's being proposed in Alberta is going to be for surgeries, but the health minister has said they're also looking at expanding it to family doctors. So we're not sure yet, but let's see. Jen, it's two-tier healthcare. What's going to be, I think they're calling it a hybrid, where you will be a doctor in the public system doing publicly funded things. You will be in the private sector as a doctor doing privately funded things, or you'll do some mix. They haven't come up with the actual plan yet, so I can't comment on the details. One of the things they're talking about is if you want to be doing a hybrid where you're both in and out, you have to do some minimum number of public services, but then after you've done them, you can then do more and bill extra. So obviously, look, let's state the obvious here. The devil's going to be in the details, 100%, and I don't know how they're going to do this. Also, I think I will confess I don't have a ton of faith in the Alberta government to not turn this into a boondoggle. These guys seem to have at times kind of a reverse Midas touch, particularly when it comes to healthcare. They pick up a piece of gold and it immediately turns into just dung. So color me skeptical, but thank God they're talking about it. I want to tell you something, and I know listeners and viewers will forgive me for being vague. But in recent weeks, my family did have a medical emergency. And by terrible coincidence, while that was happening, one of my very good friends had a medical emergency in his family. He's Canadian, but he's an expat now, and he lives in a developing country. Jen, his family, hands down, had better healthcare.
Oh, yeah, that's not even, and a lot of developing countries have radically exceeded Canadian sort of just access to doctors, availability, even the types of procedures. I mean, people in Canada are very, very naive about the realities of our healthcare system versus even what's available in a lot of developing countries. Yeah.
I knew that on an intellectual level, but just texting back and forth for the last few weeks with my buddy, and his health situation was quite serious. Like it was something that required an emergency, and it didn't go perfectly. Like it was, there were setbacks, there were problems. But the availability of care, the speed with which the care was available, and the quality of the care left absolutely nothing to be desired. And the experience that my family and I have been grinding through over the last 3 weeks, it's not good. Like it is, like when I've been telling friends of mine who are doctors, who are or in the medical field, what we've been dealing with, they've all been like going, "Oh man, yeah, God, that shouldn't have happened." Like, boy, that's not right. Like they must have been really slammed that night to kind of rush through you guys and use a stopgap instead of taking it on correctly. So, when this Alberta idea was floated, I was looking at some of the usual suspects, Jen, either on the left generally in commentary or journalism, or certainly medical professionals and medical organizations coming out and defending Canadian healthcare. One guy, and I don't even know who it was, it was a clip on TV I saw, said Tommy Douglas would be rolling over in his grave. I don't care. Like we have to kind of get that through our heads. I am not morally obligated to allow my loved ones to suffer in pain to satisfy the ghost of Tommy Douglas. That's not what I'm here for. My purpose in life, and something we've been talking about a lot of this podcast, what is our purpose? I don't know what my national purpose is, but I know that my purpose as a son, a brother, a husband, a father, an uncle, various other things, is to take care of my people. And I got to tell you, Jen, nowhere on my top 100 list of priorities when I'm trying to take care of my family is how the ghost of Tommy Douglas would feel about it. And I just don't understand what we've done as a country that has allowed us to think that this matters. We have to
kind of concept of national identity to attenuate to the point where the ghost of Tommy Douglas is all we've got left. So if you're not willing to allow your wife to suffer needlessly in a failing healthcare system, then really there's nothing left of national identity to preserve. Now, is there?
The idea that it's the job of my wife or my parents or my kids or your husband, your kids, your parents to suffer for Canadian national identity is, I think, on the surface, I think everybody would agree it's completely insane. But that is exactly what actually happens in reality, in the actual world here. And one of the things I just find it very interesting, because these are smart people. These are not dumb people. They're educated. They're intelligent. They have all the real world experience they need.
Hypocrites. They all also are hypocrites, because when it's their wife, they're not going to be thinking about Tommy Douglas. They're going to use every resource at their disposal to
call their buddy in the other unit and say, "Hey, can you get down here right away?"
And if it means flying to Mexico or flying across the border to get the MRI within 5 minutes as opposed to 5 months, then they're going to do it.
Yeah,
and they're going to be private about it. And like I'm sorry, there have also been left-leaning political leaders who you all know who I'm talking about, but shall remain nameless, whose very serious healthcare probably wasn't dealt with in Canada.
Yeah. I think one of the things that just drives me around the bend on this one, Jen, and to be clear, I'm not endorsing what Alberta ends up doing. I want to see the plan, and then I want to see them not fuck it up. There are two steps between where I am today and me saying, this was great. But I want Canadians in general to start defending the system we actually have, not the system we wish we had in theory. If we're going to have a conversation about moving to a hybrid model or outright two-tiered or private delivery, I don't care, whatever we want to call it, we should assess the pros and cons. We should be aware that there are going to be cons. Like, there's no free lunch. There will be downsides to this. And we need to have a rational conversation about how that looks compared to the status quo of today that is real, not Tommy Douglas's fucking poltergeist. We need to actually compare what we've got against what we have here. And I know the counter argument, Jen, as ever, is going to be, well, we should spend more on that. We should fix the public system. We have been trying to do that longer than I have been alive. I would like to stay alive. And I think those two things are now in tension.
So here's a couple points. One of the benefits of the way that we structured our polity here is that we live in a confederation, which means different provinces can experiment within the boundaries of federal law with different systems. Daniel Smith has always been a proponent of a more privatized healthcare system, or introducing more private care within the public system while maintaining a universal payment structure, essentially. So this isn't particularly surprising. Alberta being a more conservative province and the UCP having more leash to work with, has more political ability to experiment with different forms of healthcare or different types of delivery models of healthcare. And one of the benefits of living in a confederated system like this is that then we can see if it works. You know what I mean? Like, we can try something else in another province. If it's a success, you could roll it out in other provinces. If it's a giant clusterfuck, Well, then no
Laboratories
one.
of democracy.
Yeah, well, that's literally it. We're laboratories of different policy and laboratories of democracy. We don't all have to do things the same way. That's good. We shouldn't have to do things the same way. So I'm open to this experiment. I'm open to seeing how it goes. One of the concerns I have with the government is that, this process of sort of introducing more privatized healthcare, which, by the way, we've been doing for decades now. We've been introducing various forms of privatized services like cataract surgeries and hip surgeries for decades. I don't even know when those started, but we're going on 2 decades now. This is not a new thing. And for the most part, I think it's been generally regarded as successful. But that process will only get public buy-in, even in Alberta and in the rest of the country, so long as people understand it to be a fair and equitable process. By that, I mean it will only get the benefit of the doubt so long as this doesn't wind up having sections of a public healthcare system get sold off to the UCP and its buddies.
Yeah.
It's not a corrupt process.
Well, this is why I've held my praise.
Well, and right now we know the current Alberta government is in the midst of a very considerable scandal with AHS, too close ties with particular billionaires, and allegations that essentially a tendered processes to outsource some of these services have gone to people who are too close with the government. If this process has a whiff of corruption to it, the whole thing will be regarded as suspect at outset, and people aren't going to give an experiment with different types of healthcare delivery models a fair shot. So, look, that it be fair and non-corrupt is part of the process of experimentation. And if you can't do this in a way that isn't controversial, corrupt, and questionable, then it is not a model that will be replicated in other provinces, potentially to those provinces' significant detriment.
Can I ask you a really interesting moral question? And then I don't have anything. I think I've made my point on healthcare. I don't really have anything to add, but I do want to follow up for that. Just for gray moral zone. If Alberta were to roll out a system and if it goes wrong in exactly the way that you're worried about, but that one day in the future, your husband or you or one of your kids needs help and the corrupted, captured oligarchical system is better able to respond than the public one, do you care?
No, of course I won't.
Me neither.
Look, I mean, here's the thing that I think people have a fantasy of our healthcare system. Usually that fantasy hits disillusionment the second they have to encounter it in a real way on an issue that's serious. The second, I'm not being disrespectful here. I am perfectly aware that we have wonderful doctors, we have wonderful oncologists, and I know people who've had very, very good, positive experiences with the healthcare system. But you can't encounter the healthcare system as a Canadian today with also not encountering the places where it is not working or not functioning appropriately. You will sit in a wait room for 8 hours to get a matter dealt with because your doctor can't get you until whatever. Yeah. That is not avoidable. And the positive experiences of people who have been streamlined through heart attack, dealing with a heart attack or dealing with a stroke and dealing with cancer and getting the type of care that is world class, notwithstanding. I'm not saying that also doesn't happen within our healthcare system. We know that. So, but it's usually the stuff that's just below that where you run into very significant problems, and we all know that's happening, and that those are issues. That burnout is real, and that the pressure we're putting on our doctors in an increasingly unsustainable system is very significant. So, all of that notwithstanding, we already have 2-tier healthcare. We've always already had 2-tier healthcare because people know that if you have money, you go to the States. And that's what they do.
Even if you're people like you and I, Jen, we have contacts, we have influence, we have doctor friends, we can call in favors. It's ridiculous.
Yes, your ability to access care is disproportionately linked to your social capital.
Yeah.
That's the reality of the system as it works today. And And increasingly, as you mentioned, developing nations become more effective at healthcare delivery, and they have. The other thing that's going to happen is that even people who aren't super rich don't have to go to America. You're going to go to Mexico, you're going to go to Turkey, you're going to go to a place that is now establishing itself as a medical tourism capital in order to get certain kinds of problems dealt with. I mean, I'm not saying you can do that if you have an immediate heart attack, but if you have a chronic health condition, or if you're dealing with something more pervasive, you go elsewhere. And that's just happening. That is the reality. So, does it in that reality, does it not make sense to introduce some form of private delivery to try and keep some of that money in a Canadian system, to keep innovation happening in a Canadian system, and at the same time, hopefully provide better access to care?
Yeah.
Also in a system that every rich person who goes and buys an MRI takes themselves off the list for someone who's less able to afford an MRI. Like, look, this I'm going to go into a bit of a rant here because I know we're going on too long here. But is that like, would I much prefer to live in a system that is perfectly universal, perfectly equal, and world-class and highly effective? Yes, that is my option A. But after 20 years of this drama, we've seen that option A isn't on the table for whatever reason. And it's not an option, and it's not been an option at any provincial level.
Yeah.
No province has been able to pull that off effectively.
Yep.
So we have to go to option B. Option B's not as ideal. And I don't want to go to an American-style healthcare system, but maybe a German-style healthcare system would be fine.
How about a French-style healthcare system, or Japanese?
Or a French-style healthcare system, or a Japanese one. There are other models we can be looking at here who are doing this much better than we are. And maybe we could consider being better for once. I don't know. The other thing I would say is I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, and then I will shut this podcast down. But I don't know if you saw the discourse.
You just slammed the laptop shut?
Yeah, exactly. Did you see the discourse this week about the homeless guy, or presumably homeless guy? Maybe he was just drunk. Who knows? But he was sitting on the TTC subway, face down, clearly passed out and inebriated, not okay, with his pants down, taking up 4 seats on the TTC subway. And you had some very interesting progressive voices who were effectively like, anyone who objects to this just wants to kill homeless people. I mean, literally, that was one of them. And you had a lot of rambling about, this is just what it is like to live in a big city now. There are no problems. You're the problem. You're the NIMBY stigmatizer loser for even thinking that this is an issue. And I
saw the picture and I saw the discourse, yeah.
And I just can't help but think, do the people making that kind of argument not understand how totally counterproductive it is to make that argument?
They have no idea. They have, forgive them. Look, they know not what they know, or was it they know not what they don't know? Okay, whatever. So firstly, people passed out face down on the subway with their pants around their waist. That's obviously not okay and not normal. Yeah, that's not cool.
That's not cool. Secondly, that's obviously a problem. That person's in trouble and needs help, okay? And also, it's not cool for that person to make everyone else around them in the TTC uncomfortable. And I will say this also as a woman. You need to have public spaces where women are comfortable, or your public spaces are going to cease to be public spaces real fast. So if you continue to tolerate urban blight and decay, and the increasing colonization of your public spaces with antisocial behavior, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to create a deeply reactionary backlash, where these places are just going to start getting cleared out because police come in with batons and start hitting heads. Okay,
I'm not convinced it'll be the police.
Well, or vigilantism, or some version of this. Okay, that's where one of these options go. Or two, this is where the other option goes, and it's in some ways more insidious, and that is elite regression is what I would call it. Anybody who has resources simply removes themselves from public space, as they do in highly unequal and oligarchic societies. Okay, so there will be elite parks, there will be gated communities. There will be alternative transit system that's largely based on private driving, as opposed to investment in public infrastructure and public transit.
You'll take You'll have your driver take you from your gated community to your private hospital.
That's right. When the public systems, and I mean public spaces and public systems, start to degrade, if you don't get on that and start making sure that they're as functional as they can possibly be, people who have means start to withdraw into parallel societies. That's what's happened in the United States with gated communities. That's what's happening in places in Toronto that are starting to hire their own police forces. Like, you create a bifurcated society, which ultimately collapses social mobility because the people who have money don't interact with the rest of society anymore.
Yep. It's happening already. Right? It's not a future hypothetical. It's how much further we go because it's started.
That's already starting to happen because public spaces have become non-functional.
Alongside public services. Yeah, it's both at once. So you're talking about two different things, but it is both.
Public services and public institutions are becoming non-functional.
Yes.
And so the end result of that is we're creating an increasingly bifurcated society.
Yes.
That is the path we're on. And screaming out about the people who object to having the passed out dude with his pants off on the subway only accelerates that process because you're not fixing the underlying disorder. You're just trying to normalize it. Normalizing disorder does not end in a positive place for you. If you care about creating a society that is based on the common weal, okay, that is based on this idea that people of different economic and socioeconomic statuses can come together and build something useful for one another, we have to have a common set of standards of things we're willing to tolerate and accept. And that ain't going to make the cut.
For the third segment in a row, Jen, we're back to values and whether or not we have any and if we're prepared to defend them.
That's right. Yeah. So I don't know, look, by all means, Stu, scream at the terrible conservative NIMBYs who have a problem with that. And those people are going to start taking Ubers. And that's eventually going to lead to public support and income leading out of the public transit system. And that's going to put the public transit system into a non-virtuous circle where essentially increasingly people are just not comfortable using it. And then you're going to have less of a public life. You're going to have a shittier city. You're going to have a decline in public transit usage. And you're going to have a much more unequal, less vibrant, less healthy city that actually nobody really wants. I mean, that's where this goes.
It's there.
It's there. It's already happening. Right. So
we need to get the elites in this country more focused on systems functioning correctly rather than they themselves as individuals having the opportunity to loudly show their moral superiority.
Yeah, well, your moral superiority doesn't count for shit if the systems around you are collapsing now, are they? You can be as morally...
They get high on the fumes, though.
I mean, look, you can be as morally superior as you want, but that doesn't fix anything. I mean, it's not a solution to these problems.
Nope. And that's why we're not, but unfortunately, that's why we're not solving them.
Yeah, well.
We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
Yeah, like I said, this goes one of two ways. I think it's actually going to go in the more corrosive direction. That's just complacent decline, where, as I said, people with money opt out of most of civil society. That's where I think this is actually going.
Yeah, maybe Jen, it's a perspective thing. Maybe Calgary's a bit further behind the curve, but come hang out with me a bit more in the center of the universe. It's happening. It's not an abstract hypothetical.
At least you all get to feel very good about yourselves while that's happening.
I never feel good about myself, but that's a topic for another segment.
Just the important thing is that you feel good about yourself. That's the crucial.
That's an aspiration, but it's a nice one. Well, enjoy Ottawa. I will enjoy Halifax. God, the food here is amazing. Thanks, everybody. It's an unusual podcast, but as Jen said at the very beginning, a very, very Canadian podcast. Check us out, readtheline.ca, like and subscribe. We'll talk with you soon.